Mr. Sergeant of Arms, invite the members into the chamber and close the doors. I hereby declare the House of Representatives of the 112th General Assembly of the State of Tennessee now in session. Will the members please stand? Will the visitors in the gallery please stand and remain standing through the Pledge of Allegiance? Representative Wright will serve as chaplain of the day. Representative Wright, you are recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Dear colleagues, honored guests, welcome to this special Thursday of the 112th. In honor of today, I've written this little resolution. Whereas choose is a fork in the road of life, whereas day is what we're experiencing now, whereas you is you all, whereas serve is what we do, whereas me is Dave. Whereas my house is this house of which I am a member, and whereas the Lord is the person of authority, therefore choose this day whom you will serve. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. I hope you can make that declaration today. Would you please pray with me? Almighty God, I make choices every day. I ask that you be with me each time I make a decision. We desire your guidance, Lord. Forgive us when we falter. Inspire us as you did warrior leader Joshua. Increase our faith to lead by example. Strengthen our commitment. Help us as we choose to serve. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Representative Wright will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Attention, salute, pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, House.
Thank you. Mr. Clerk, please take the roll.
Roll call.
Mr. Clerk, please take the roll.
Mr. Speaker, 92 members present.
Let the journal reflect that Representatives Byrd, Carter, Ogles, Howell, Powers, Potts are excused. Next order, Mr. Clerk.
Welcoming and honoring.
Welcoming and honoring anyone seeking recognition. Representative Hicks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to welcome Dr. Alan Cox. He's from Johnson City, my district, and he is serving with the National Guard, and he is the Doctor of the Day today for the House of Representatives, and he has been serving in the COVID relief since April of 2020. So he's been working hard for the last year on COVID relief. So make Dr. Cox welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other welcome and honoring? Representative Lynn, you are recognized.
Mr. Speaker, members of the House, just walking in the door to my left is the new district attorney representing Wilson County, Smith County, Macon County, Trousdale County. Thank goodness I have my partner here, Clay County and Jackson County. Jason Lawson lives in Mount Juliet, and we are honored to have him with us here today. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Sparks.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, yesterday I mentioned my 32nd anniversary. My wife was not 15 when I married her. She was 18. I was 22. Just to clarify to members. Thank you.
Simple math, simple math. Anybody else welcoming and honoring? Next order, Mr. Clark.
Introduction to resolutions.
Leader Lambert, you're recognized.
Mr. Speaker, move that all resolutions properly filed be introduced pursuant to Rule Number 17 in place of the consent calendar or refer to the appropriate standing committee.
Without objection, so ordered. Next order, Mr. Clark.
Senate Joint Resolutions congratulatory and memorializing.
Leader Lambert, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move that all Senate joint resolutions congratulatory and memorializing and lying on the desk be placed on the consent calendar pursuant to Rule Number 17.
Without objection, so ordered. Next order, Mr. Clark.
Resolutions lying over.
Leader Lambert, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move that all resolutions lying over be referred to the appropriate standing committee.
Without objection, so ordered. Next order, Mr. Clark.
Introduction to bills.
Leader Lambert, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move that House Bills 1,631 and 1,632 be introduced and passed on first consideration.
Without objection, so ordered. Next order, Mr. Clark.
Senate bills on first consideration.
Leader Lambert, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move the Senate Bills 271, 332, 566, 656, 832, 858, 1,027, 1,240, 1,435, 1,534, 1,634, and 1,635 transmitted by the Senate be held on the desk pending third consideration of the companion House bills.
Without objection, so ordered. Next order, Mr. Clark.
Senate bills on second consideration. House bills on second consideration.
Leader Lambert, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move that House Bills 1,630 be passed on second consideration and held on the desk refer to the appropriate standing committee.
Without objection, so ordered. Next order, Mr. Clark.
Petitions and memorials, reports of standing committees, reports of select committees, calendars. Mr. Speaker, the House has a consent calendar.
Chairman Zachary, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of the consent calendar on third and final consideration in keeping with Rule 50.
Gentleman moves passage of the consent calendar properly seconded. Mr. Clerk, any objections been filed?
Mr. Speaker, no objections filed.
Anyone seeking recognition on consent calendar? Representative Reagan, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On item number 1, HJR 404, which recognizes the 100th anniversary of the 105th Attack Squadron here in Tennessee, I move that all that vote in the affirmative be signed on as co-prime sponsors.
Exclusion is duly noted without objection. So ordered. Representative Manis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In consultation with both leaders, I request that all members who vote yes on House Joint Resolution 408 be added as co-sponsors, giving priority to members of the Knox County delegation. And I would like to also request that all members of the Knox County delegation who vote yes on House Joint Resolution 409 be added as co-sponsors.
Exclusion is duly noted without objection. So ordered. Any further recognition on consent calendar? Seeing none. We are voting on the consent calendar. All members in favor vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Hang on. Ms. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 87, no nays.
Having received the constitutional majority, I declare the consent calendar passed without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Next order, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, the House has a regular calendar.
Call the first bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 412 by Representative Jernigan relative to retired law enforcement officers.
Representative Jernigan, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of House Bill 412 on third and final consideration.
Representative Jernigan moves passage, probably seconded. Mr. Clerk, call the First Amendment.
House Civil Justice Committee Amendment number 1.
Chairman Farmer, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Civil Justice Amendment number 1 rewrites the bill. I move to adopt Civil Justice Committee Amendment number 1, deferred sponsor for explanation.
Chairman Farmer moves adoption of amendment number 1, properly seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. All those in favor of amendment number 1 say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopted. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Representative Jernigan, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, House Bill 412 exempts retired police officers from serving as a guard, patrol, or watch person if the retired officer meets the same requirements to carry a firearm as an active police officer under the Law Enforcement Officers Safety Act. also known as LEOSA. Meeting the requirements of an active police officer under LEOSA has significant more regulation and safeguards than a typical retired officer seeking an exemption under the Board of Private Protective Services. Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to answer any questions or renew my motion.
Representative Jernigan renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of House Bill 412 as amended, vote aye when the bell rings. All those opposed, vote no. As every member voted, does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 90, no nays.
House Bill 412, having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 472 by Chairman White, relative to public charter schools. Mr. Speaker, the Senate bill is on the desk.
Chairman White, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 353.
Chairman White moves substitute and conform in Senate Bill 353, properly seconded without objection. So ordered. Chairman White, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of Senate Bill 353 on third and final consideration.
Chairman White moves passage of Senate Bill 353 on third and final consideration. Properly second. Mr. Clerk, call the First Amendment.
House Education Instruction Amendment number 1. Mr. Speaker, same as Senate Amendment number 1.
Chair Lady Moody, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move to withdraw.
Without objection, amendment number 1 withdrawn. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairman White, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this simply permits our teachers and other full-time permanent employees of a public charter school to participate in the group insurance plan selected by the governing body of the public charter school. With that, Mr. Speaker, I renew my motion.
Chairman White renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senate Bill 353, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Ms. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 77, 12 nays, 1 present, not voting.
Senate Bill 353 having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 476 by Chairman White and others relative to the use of surveillance cameras on interstate highways. Mr. Speaker, Senate bill is on the desk.
Chairman White, you are recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to request a roll to next Thursday's calendar on House Bill 476.
Without objection, rolled to next Thursday's calendar. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 1238 by Chairman Reagan and others relative to higher education.
Chairman Reagan, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of House Bill 1238 on third and final consideration.
Chairman Reagan moves passage, properly seconded. Mr. Clerk, call up First Amendment.
House Education Administration Committee Amendment number 1.
Chairman White, you are recognized. Chairman White.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to adopt.
Chairman White moves adoption amendment number 1, properly second. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. All those in favor of amendment number 1 say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopt next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendment.
Chairman Reagan, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Speaker. I'd like to explain this bill to the members before I renew my motion. This is called the Transparency in Foreign Investment Act. We, as a nation, have endured revolution, civil war, world war, Cold War, and regional wars. We have survived these. Now, we are in a different kind of war, an information war. Today, the Chinese Communist Party, or the CCP, has risen to illegitimate prosperity to become one of the greatest threats to our American way of life. Moreover, this rise is fueled by the theft and abuse of information at every turn, For example, the CCP steals intellectual property, then it obscures its intentions and covers its tracks with the spread of propaganda. This is not an abstract phenomena playing out in the remote realm of geopolitics. It's happening in our nation in full view in front of all of us. Right here in our own state of Tennessee, home to some of the greatest schools and universities in our nation, the CCP is exerting and growing its influence. Under the direction of top officials of the CCP's Office of Overseas Propaganda, China has established a network of 50 so-called Confucius Institutes at American education institutions. In 2009, Li Changcheng, then head of the Propaganda Agitation Unit for the CCP, called these outposts an important part of China's overseas propaganda setup. Their MO is simple. China gives American host institutions cash, and the CCP operatives get to teach a distorted, regime-friendly history of Chinese states to the American students. Meanwhile, these same operatives get to live in close proximity to the resources of our modern universities and access to inside important information that is sensitive and often taxpayer funded, as well as access to our greatest minds. As one of the first acts of his office, President Biden revoked the rules proposed by President Trump that would have put pressure on American universities to disclose their foreign ties and funding. Perhaps Mr. Biden should have consulted with his nominee for the director of CIA, William Burns, who testified in his Senate confirmation hearings that Confucius Institutes were a genuine risk to U.S. security. Furthermore, he said that if he were president of a university or college that hosted a Confucius Institute, he would shut it down. House Bill 1238 does just what William Burns suggested. It forecloses any opportunity for these odious organizations on all Tennessee university and college campuses. Additionally, it also requires that these institutions report any foreign gifts or contracts from foreign sources over $10,000 for each year. Mr. Speaker, with that explanation and pending questions, I renew my motion.
Chairman Reagan renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Kumar, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Chairman Reagan, for bringing matter to our attention. Certainly, these institutes are a cultural and social threat, as well as interfering in function and gathering data under false premises. And thank you for doing this. I think this is a very important matter. We should all be aware of it. And closing these institutes is really the right thing to do to protect our society. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chairman Reagan.
Thank you for those comments. I fully concur.
Thank you. Representative White, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Chairman. I fully support your bill. I want to go on record as I did in committee. Members, the nation of Taiwan is fighting for their freedom right now. As you remember, Taiwan had to pull off in 1949 when they were overtaken by communist China, Chiang Kai-shek. We have honored Taiwan on this floor, so I just want to make sure that we keep Taiwan separate from the nation of China. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Representative Towns.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sponsor yield.
I yield.
Sponsor,
Representative Towns.
I'm listening to what you said on the House floor. And for years, really for decades back, I would wonder why America would aid and abet some of our people, some of the people in the world that really were diametrically opposed to us. We are the fault of China being as big as they are, because our companies here went over in search of cheap labor years ago and left America, okay? They began to make all our products. They began to learn the schematics. They began to learn everything it was, and then they leapfrogged us. We did that. It's like a self-inflicted wound that I've never understood. And now we have to deal with it in a very smart and strategic way, because we have inflated and made their muscles gargantuan, okay? And so maybe this will address some of it, but still the economic tie is so great that we still have to be methodical in how we do it, but it's our doing of the country. And I've never liked it. Thank you.
Chairman Reagan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for your comments. I fully concur, and this is the beginning of turning the tide.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Representative Sparks.
Thank you, Chairman Reagan, for this piece of legislation. Just want to bring awareness to what Chairman White mentioned. The Epoch Times in Hong Kong was just recently vandalized. The First Amendment is not the basis of that Democrat of their country for sure. But I want to also say to the Christian population is growing in China. They predict there'll be more Christians in China than there will be America here real soon. So let's always be welcome to the Chinese people and other countries that's over there. And heart goes out to those folks that are under persecution for their beliefs. So thank you, Chairman.
Any further discussion? Seeing none. Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of House Bill 1238 as amended, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Let the journal reflect Representative Whitson is excused. Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 90, no nays.
House Bill 1238, having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 778 by Chairman Kumar and others relative to collaborative pharmacy practice agreements.
Chairman Kumar, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of House Bill 778 on third and final consideration.
Chairman Kumar moves passage, properly seconded. Mr. Clerk, call it First Amendment.
House Health Committee Amendment number 1.
Chairman Terry, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment makes the bill. I defer to the sponsor for further explanation. Move to adopt.
Chairman Terry moves adoption of amendment number 1, properly seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. All those in favor of amendment number 1 say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopt it. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairman Kumar, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. House Bill 778 establishes a statewide collaborative practice agreement between the Chief Medical Officer of the Department of Health and the pharmacies. Those are pharmacies that are administering COVID-19 vaccination in our fight against this virus. In addition, it also provides for training of the pharmacists as well as the needed record keeping, vaccine registry, and adverse events reporting. With that explanation, Mr. Speaker, I renew my motion.
Chairman Kumar renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of House Bill 778 as amended, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Moon, aye. Kumar, aye. Cheryl, aye. Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 90, no nays.
House Bill 778, having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 142 by Chairman Terry and others relative to public assistance.
Chairman Terry, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of House Bill 142 on third and final consideration.
Chairman Terry moves passage, properly seconded. Mr. Clerk, call it First Amendment, please.
House Health Committee Amendment number 1.
Vice Chairman Leatherwood, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment makes the bill. I defer to the sponsor for further explanation and move for adoption.
Vice Chairman Leatherwood moves adoption. Amendment number 1, properly seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. All those in favor of amendment number 1 say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopted. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
House Government Operations Committee Amendment number 1 filed as House Amendment 2.
Chairman Reagan, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment gives the Families First Community Advisory Boards approval authority rather than just advisory. It prohibits legislative members from voting on matters of monetary awards or grants. It changes the words gender to sex I defer to the sponsor for further explanation. Move to adopt.
Chairman Reagan moves adoption of amendment number 2, properly seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. All those in favor of amendment number 2 say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopt it. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
House Finance Ways and Means Committee Amendment number 1, Mr. Speaker, it's filed as House Amendment 3.
Chair Lady Hazelwood, you are recognized.
I move adoption of the amendment, and I defer to the sponsor for an explanation.
Chair Lady Hazelwood moves adoption of amendment number 3, properly seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. All those in favor of amendment number 3 say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have you adopted. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairman Terry, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is the TANF Innovation and Opportunity Act. It is a collaborative piece of legislation between the administration, DHS, Commissioner Carter, and members of the TANF working group put forth by Lieutenant Governor McNally and Speaker Sexton. As you are aware, DHS receives a yearly recoupment grant of $191 million to go towards TANF, and the state of Tennessee amassed a reserve of well over $700 million. And DHS may utilize those funds with 4 main purposes in mind. DHS utilizes these TANF funds in 4 main categories to achieve those 4 purposes: cash assistance, a reserve, workforce development, and community grants. What this bill does, has essentially 4 sections. It has program integrity protections. It's going to increase penalties for fraud on TANF and SNAP, and it's also going to ensure confidentiality of personal information for individuals who report fraud. Secondly, it incentivizes self-sufficiency for families. It increases the cash assistance to these families, and it provides a pathway to prosperity pilot program, which incentivizes recipients to improve their workforce skills via education, trade school, or apprenticeship. Third, we have our TANF reserve investments. We have a TANF advisory board that will evaluate the efficacy of the program through a research partner. We have Families First Community Grants Program, will be up to $50 million. And then we have the Tennessee Opportunity Pilot Program, which will help Tennessee develop proven and effective community wraparound services for these recipients. And fourth, we have the unspent annual reserve. And what we're going to do with that is we're going to set the reserve at $191 million and ensure that the funds that go above that get out to the recipients via wraparound services in the communities, so that we don't have another issue where we have a buildup of $700 million. So with that explanation, I renew my motion.
Chairman Terry renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Miller, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, sponsor, and thank you, members of the working committee. The question concerning the responsibilities and the powers of the Community Advisory Board, which gives them approval authority. What is the makeup of that advisory committee?
Chairman Terry.
Thank you. There are up to 21 members, and that is, let me find the list here on here. There's up to 21 members. It is a diverse group of individuals. There will be the Commissioner Carter of DHS will be the person that chairs that. There will be commissioner or their designee from education, I think ECD. There's going to be 4 members from the General Assembly that will be on there. And the DHS can put up to 6 members of their own on there as well. So there'll be different commissioners on there.
Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So the 4 members, legislative members, would they be from both the House and the Senate and appointed by whom?
Chairman Terry.
Thank you. Yes, there'll be 2 from the House and 2 from the Senate. Two members appointed by Speaker and Lieutenant Governor.
Representative Miller.
Again, thank you for the legislation. Thank you.
Chairman Terry.
Thank you. And again, I want to thank you. You may not know this, but last session, you and I sat in committee several times next to each other, and some of the discussions that we had sparked some information. So thank you for your input on this as well.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Chairman Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I want to applaud Chairman Terry for the yeoman's work that's been done. This is truly a team effort, as you see all the individuals up here in support of this legislation. This is probably the most important bill that we're going work on this year absent the budget document. This is critically important. And when you go back to your constituents, there's two words that you can describe this legislation as: strengthen families. That's exactly what we're doing here. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of House Bill 142 as amended, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Hardaway, aye. Farmer, aye. Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 92, no nays.
House Bill 142, I received the constitutional majority. I hereby declare passed without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 1178 by Chairman Crawford, relative to convenient voting centers.
Chairman Crawford, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of House Bill 1178 on third and final consideration.
Chairman Crawford moves passage, properly seconded. Mr. Clerk, call it First Amendment.
House Local Government Committee Amendment number 1.
Vice Chairman Wright, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to adopt.
Vice Chairman Wright moves adoption. Amendment number 1, properly seconded. Any discussion? There's no vote taking place. Hang on. We're fine. Vice Chairman Wright moves adoption amendment number 1, properly seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. All those in favor of amendment number 1 say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopted. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairman Crawford, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is our convenient voting centers bill. We did this a couple of years ago with Rutherford, Wilson, Williams, and Monroe County. That pilot or the sunset's coming up on that. So we have to renew that. It's worked out great for those counties. We are adding 3 counties to this time, which are Sumner, Sullivan, and Wheatley. I'll be glad to take any questions, and I'll renew my motion.
Chairman Crawford renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Shaw, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you for this legislation. I think this is really the future of voting, and I really appreciate you bringing this. I'm excited about this. If we can get broadband all over the state of Tennessee, I think this is our future, and I appreciate you bringing this legislation.
Chairman Crawford.
Thank you, Representative. This has the opportunity to not only save our locals money, but to make it more convenient for our citizens to be able to vote. And it just take a little bit to get used to it. But I agree, this is the way of the future. I renew my motion.
Any further discussion? Leader Camper, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sponsor Yield. A question with respect to the precincts that had to close because of the convenience voting. Do you have data on the impact it's had in the communities of all of the smaller precincts that closed when we went to convenient voting?
Chairman Crawford.
I think I understand your question. You're wanting to know if we have data that how many of the closed precincts have been effective. Is that correct?
Leader Camper.
Yes.
Chairman Crawford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do not have that. I'm sure that we have that information within the Secretary of State's office that we can provide you. I'll be glad to get that for you. But every county that we've worked on this with that's been in part of the pilot program, it's been a great success. But I'll be glad to try to get that information for you.
Leader Camper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Sponsor.
Any further discussion? Leader Lambert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I just want to say thank you for including Sumner County in this. This is something we've looked at for several years. And like many bills that we have passed on this House floor, it ensures that voting is much easier, is much more available to folks at the times that are most convenient for them. and will definitely increase voter turnout. There's no doubt about it. It makes the day of election be basically like our early voting sites, which many states out there unfortunately do not have. But in Tennessee, we've been leading the nation on making things much easier to vote. And thank you for continuing down that pathway.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, any objections to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of House Bill 1178 as amended, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Hazelwood, aye. Powell, aye. Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 92, no nays.
House Bill 1178 having received constitutional majority, I hereby declare it passed without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 1436 by Chairman Curcio relative to 3-judge panels.
Chairman Curcio, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of House Bill 1436 on third and final consideration.
Chairman Curcio moves passage, properly seconded. Mr. Clerk, call up First Amendment.
House State Government Committee Amendment number 1.
Chairman Kiesling, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The amendment does rewrite the bill. We'll defer to the sponsor for a further explanation. We move to adopt, Mr. Speaker.
Chairman Kiesling moves adoption of amendment number 1, properly seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. All those in favor of amendment number 1 say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopted. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairman Curcio, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I renew my motion.
Chairman Curcio renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will sponsor yield.
Chairman Curcio.
My pleasure, sir.
Representative Stewart.
Question, is there a precedent in our laws that you know of for a 3-judge panel to decide issues of this sort or any sort?
Chairman Curcio.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for the question. What this bill is doing is it's in response to a federal Supreme Court opinion that says any gerrymandering or partisan redistricting challenges would be the purview of the states. We don't have a system set up currently for that, so this is to try to get ahead of something that we hope doesn't happen, of course. But if it does, we want to make sure that we're ahead of the game.
Representative Stewart.
I guess here's my concern with this bill. It's a constitutional concern. I asked you whether there were 3-judge panels because I look at the Constitution of the state of Tennessee, and it seems to create layers of courts, a Supreme Court, appellate courts, and then specifically Chancery and Circuit Courts. Section 4, or Article 6, Section 4 of the Constitution clearly envisions Chancery and Circuit Courts being a court with a single judge elected by the people of his or her district. And so I'm trying to figure out where in the Constitution there's authorization for a 3-judge panel. To me, it seems to have no place in the framework that our Constitution is set up. Has anybody looked at this that you know of?
Chairman Curcio.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I'm glad you mentioned that because one of the things that maybe you have misunderstood about this bill is that somehow it's creating new judges. This panel would be a selection from Chancery. It's my understanding that, as you know, the Chancery courts are also called the Court of Equity, right? And so what could be more equitable than making sure that these statewide important issues are decided by a judge from each grand division for equity and to make sure that all the rights of all Tennesseans are represented. So I think it mirrors exactly what our Constitution would prefer.
Representative Stewart.
Yeah, I don't think it does. Maybe a good idea, bad idea, but it's an unprecedented idea. I don't think this has ever been done. I think the Constitution does not make room for it. Has the Attorney General or any other legal authority evaluated whether this bill you're proposing is consistent with the Tennessee Constitution's establishment for judicial power?
Chairman Curcio.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'd point out that this bill passed on the House floor 72-20 last year. And so certainly there would have been plenty of time. I speak from time to time with the Attorney General's office. They don't mind, raising their hand when they have an issue about something. And so the fact that I passed this on the House floor last year and then filed it again, not as a caption, but as, gave plenty of notice, haven't heard from anybody. So I think we're on solid footing.
Representative Stewart.
Would you be willing to roll the bill so we could get the Attorney General or someone else of your choice to really evaluate the constitutional concern?
Chairman Kershaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No.
Representative Stewart.
Okay, well, I just wanted to give you this opportunity. I mean, we have plenty of time left in this session. I don't hold myself out as a scholar of the Tennessee Constitution, but I think to create this unprecedented panel, which has never before existed in the entire history of our state, as far as I know, where it clearly seems like the Constitution doesn't envision these sorts of panels and actually envisions specific judges elected by the people of their district, individual judges, not triple judges or unusual panels that we're making up as we go. I don't think the Constitution envisions this. I'm not sure why we'd go ahead with this legislation without at least getting the legal authority that the taxpayers pay to look at such things to issue an opinion. But I wanted to give you that opportunity. Thank you.
Chairman Kershaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I apologize to my good friend from Davidson County. Having checked my notes on this, we actually did meet with the Attorney General's office last year, and they had no issues with the bill.
Representative Stewart.
Okay, so just to be clear, there's an Attorney General opinion somewhere that we can all look at that explains this?
Chairman Kershaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I apologize again to my friend from Davidson County. I was merely correcting a statement that I made previously. I have spoken with the AG's office, and they had no issues with the bill.
Representative Stewart.
Yeah, I don't think that's the same thing as what I was asking for. Again, I think this is a pretty extraordinary change in our judicial procedures. I don't think it's constitutional. If the bill passes, I guess courts will have to make that threshold decision before such a three-judge panel is impaneled. There may be good and bad ways to deal with redistricting. I think the best way is probably to use the system we've used for the entire history of our state, which is just to allow the judges that are elected by the people to make the decision. So I'm going to vote against this bill. I would urge anybody who thinks we've been doing pretty well in Tennessee so far with our decision making to vote against it as well, because this is unprecedented. It's a totally new day. And I think it's pretty clearly it's certainly not envisioned by the founders or by the people who created our Constitution. And I really think it's inconsistent with the Constitution. Thank you.
Representative Reagan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Along that line, I'd like to read from the Tennessee Constitution, Article 6, Section 1. The judicial power of the state shall be vested in one Supreme Court and in such circuit, chancery, and other inferior courts as the legislature shall from time to time ordain and establish. I think the Constitution is very clear. This body has the power to do anything we choose establishing courts, which is what this bill does. Thank you.
Chairman Kershaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I concur with my colleagues' reading of the Constitution.
Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sponsor Yield.
Chairman Hart.
Yes, sir.
Chairman Kershaw.
We are actually working from the bill and not the amendment at this time, correct?
Chairman Kershaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No, the amendment was adopted.
Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What is the current law of challenging redistricting issues?
Chairman Kershaw.
So currently, again, the Supreme Court has opined that these partisan gerrymandering cases are the purview of the states. So this was a ruling that came out, I think, 2 years ago, and that conclusion that partisan gerrymandering claims are not justiciable neither condones, excessive partisan gerrymandering nor condemns complaints about redistricting. But the Supreme Court pointed out that the work at the state level needs to address questions of partisan gerrymandering. However, Tennessee currently has no mechanism for that. So this is in response to that new Supreme Court opinion.
Representative Miller.
So again, for understanding clarification, currently there's no mechanism whatsoever, knowing that in the past redistricting have had challenges in this state. Is that correct?
Chairman Kershaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I apologize. This is a new setup to respond to the Supreme Court challenge. So I'm not saying that we've not been challenged before. I'm not saying there hasn't been a previous path. It's that this opinion is new, and therefore we need to make sure that we're ready for anything that comes our way.
Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And if there is a challenge, it must be heard in the Chancery Court within that county. Is that correct?
Chairman Kershaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for the opportunity to describe how this works. So what will happen is if a party or an entity brings a partisan gerrymandering claim, then the presiding judge of that district will notify the Supreme Court. Then the Supreme Court will take a vote, and by majority vote, they will pick a trial court judge from the other two grand divisions that are not represented by that presiding judge from the jurisdiction where it was originally filed. At that point, that three-judge panel, again, these are existing judges, they're not new judges. These are already trial court judges. Will impanel and hear that partisan gerrymandering claim. Then they'll make a ruling. If the party wants to appeal the ruling, they've got 30 days to go to the Supreme Court and appeal that ruling. If there are any deficiencies that are found in, say, a particular district, if the court rules that yes, in fact, the party is correct, there's an issue here, then it will kick it back to the legislature. So we can then go back and do what we're required to do constitutionally, which is to draw a sound district. And so we could address any inefficiencies there. If we choose not to take action after a certain period of time, then the judge could get out their pen and redraw the district, but we have the opportunity to do so and take action again on what is our constitutional charge to do.
Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And sponsor, you've actually answered my follow-up questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Leader Lamberth, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I would just wanted to say it's interesting when fellow members of the bar who are happy to member of this chamber will rise to their feet and proclaim that something is unconstitutional. This is clearly our responsibility, both redistricting and setting venue and jurisdiction on what courts hear and what process they utilize. You can take any number of chapters within the code, and this body sets that up. That's what we create. You are clearly, in sponsoring this bill, furthering both of those goals, creating a pathway on how our system would be challenged within the court system, and then setting up jurisdiction and venue for that. So to, again, try to impose one's personal legal opinion upon the entire body, I would simply rise and say that is for the courts to decide down the road, but I can't imagine anything being more constitutional, as Chairman Reagan rose and stated, than this body doing our constitutional responsibility and establishing how a process like this would proceed if a lawsuit were to arise. Now, there may be those in this chamber that are eager and very litigious to challenge this process in court. I would rather that we actually spend the next few months, once we finally get the numbers from the feds, and make sure that we have a fair redistricting process that doesn't even get into the court system, that we actually make sure that we allocate the numbers of individuals that are within each House, Senate, and congressional district in a way that reflects the growth of Tennessee and no other way. So thank you for bringing the bill, but I merely wanted to rise and state that I think that it's this body's responsibility to make this decision, and we should keep it right there.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I don't think I had a question earlier, and I probably didn't clearly state it enough, but previously these were filed in federal court. And again, the Supreme Court has opined that the states need to deal with them. So I don't think I clearly answered that question, but previously they were filed in federal court. The Supreme Court has opined we need to deal with them.
Leader Camper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have been through the process of redistricting for many years, and many members in this body have participated in that process. and the process have worked. So here we are now coming up with a new process to deal with something we've dealt with for years without any problems. So my question would be to the sponsor, why now? What's happening in other states? Tennessee has been doing it right before, based on what my colleague really just said. And so here we are now, creating an entirely new panel of judges. And for what are we doing that, Mr. Sponsor?
Chairman Kershaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And that's an excellent question because you're right. We have been redistricting every 10 years for years and years and years. What is different is that 2 years ago, the Supreme Court held that partisan gerrymandering claims present political questions beyond the reach of federal courts. So previously, those challenges would go to federal court. The Supreme Court has opined that's not going to happen anymore. The states have got to develop a plan to deal with these challenges. So I agree with you. It has worked well for years and years. 2 years ago, we got a Supreme Court decision that changed that process. We're merely responding to that. And I would say, I think it is the tradition of this body of getting ahead of problems instead of waiting and let them fester and then being surprised on the back end. So the Supreme Court has opined 2 years ago that redistricting, which was coming up, from at that point, some 3-4 years in the future, and said, hey, get ready, states, because we're no longer going to play in this arena. We're going to kick these back to you. I'm proud to stand here as a proactive member of this General Assembly to say, let's get ahead of that problem and make sure that we've got the best possible system ready to go. And again, I would say that what we all hope is that we draw districts that are above board, that are not challenged, that are free, fair, and equitable, and to make sure that the voters of this state are well represented in this body, the body across the hall, and our federal counterparts, and so on. But if we are challenged for a partisan gerrymandering claim, the Supreme Court has said, states, you need to deal with it, and so we're getting ahead of that issue.
Leader Camper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Sponsor, have you looked at what other states have done with respect to this response to this case that you're talking about?
Chairman Kershaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I can't speak for other states. I'm here to lead Tennessee in the best way that I know how, and that's what my constituents have asked me to do. I will say that there are some other states, for example, North Carolina, who have gone to an impaneled judge setup for similar issues and other types of issues, constitutional claims and so forth. But again, Tennessee leads time and time again. We're the leader in the nation, and I want to make sure, hopefully this could be a precedent that maybe other states would follow. But I want to make sure that we're leading the charge on this.
Leader Camper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Representative Hardaway.
Thank you, Speaker Sexton. My first observation is to Leader Lambert and his commitment to a fair redistricting process that reflects the growth of Tennessee. I would hope that he would add the phrases "and diversity" within Tennessee, with a commitment to the Voting Rights Act. And my first question to the sponsor: how does the Voting Rights Act dovetail with this change in the judiciary?
Chairman Kershaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'm so glad, because I know when I passed this bill with 72 votes on the House floor last year, you asked me this exact same question. I think it's very important to get this on the record. Those Voting Rights Act, those civil rights claims, those would still be in the purview of federal courts. This bill touches none of that. Nothing about that process changes. This is for partisan gerrymandering claims only. If something bleeds over into Civil Rights Act or a civil rights claim, that is handled at the federal level. This bill does not change that.
Representative Hardaway.
Thank you, sir. And would you go into detail on the statute of limitations? That 1 year from the general election, help me understand the statute of limitations. Is it that simple?
Chairman Kershaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm trying to get to that section of the bill for you.
Representative Hardaway. Representative Hardaway.
Waiting
Wait, no,
for
Chairman
the
Kershio.
sponsor to get to that section.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I apologize. That provision in the amendment is gone. That's why I wanted to make sure as I scrolled through the amendment, but the amendment took that statute of limitations out.
Representative Hardaway.
That's well and fine. So now the statute of limitations does not exist, or is there another area of the statutes that applies here?
Chairman Kershio.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So again, I can just read to you from the amendment if you'd prefer that. Any action filed in court of the state challenging the validity of an act of the General Assembly appointing or redistricting state legislative or congressional districts must be heard and determined by a 3-judge panel organized in accordance with subsection B. B1 states, when an action described in subsection A is filed, the person or entity filing the action shall provide notice of the complaint to the presiding judge of the judicial district, who shall serve as the presiding judge of the 3-judge panel required by subsection A. Part 2 says, upon receipt of notice of the complaint, the presiding judge shall notify the Supreme Court, who shall, by a majority vote of the court, appoint 2 additional trial court judges to a 3-judge panel to hear and determine the action. It goes on, but there's no mention of the statute of limitations here.
Representative Hardaway.
All right, thank you, Mr. Speaker. So we'll assume from your responses and your reading of relevant language that there is no statute of limitations. When we look to the question of what's not working, your explanation was that there was nothing to work on. Is that pretty much sum up your response because of the Supreme Court ruling?
Chairman Kershio.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, so previously these challenges were filed in federal court. 2 years ago, the Supreme Court opined that partisan gerrymandering redistricting claims should be handled at the purview of the state. And so this is in response to that Supreme Court decision from 2 years ago.
Representative Hardaway.
Thank you, Speaker. The issue of extreme partisan gerrymandering is also of interest to the communities of color, because as you can tell within this chamber itself, for whatever the reason, the Republican Party and the Democratic Party have a stark contrast in participation from people of color. The representatives who sit in here now, the majority of, and I'm being kind, the majority of the Republican Party representatives in here are not people of color. So we do have an interest in the extreme partisan gerrymandering process, a special concern. So I'll ask you, when you whenever this, and I don't know when it's going to happen since we don't know exactly when we're going to receive the data, but whenever we do this, even though we don't have an independent redistricting commission in place, I would suggest to you that one way for this to work is to make sure that the redistricting is fair and just, as Lita Lambert stated, but that it take into consideration all of those protected classes within the Voting Rights Act. And with that, Mr. Speaker, unless the sponsor has something for me to respond to, I relinquish the mic.
Chairman Kershio.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, I appreciate the question from last year and repeating it here today. civil rights challenge is still the purview of the federal courts. Nothing in this bill changes that whatsoever. So if there's a civil rights claim saying that a district was drawn in a way that was discriminatory to a majority minority district, that's staying right where it is in federal court, and nothing changes about that under this bill.
Representative Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, sponsor. A couple of questions. A lot of these challenges would be brought under federal law for gerrymandering, if any issue ranging from one man, one vote to any other access to the voting rights of individuals. So my question to you is your understanding of the Supreme Court's opinion a mandate that state courts hear these cases, or is it a should rather than shall?
Chairman Kershaw.
Thank you for the question. So again, 2 years ago, the Supreme Court held that partisan gerrymandering claims present political questions beyond the reach of federal courts. So they've asked us to deal with those, and that's the process that we've set up here today.
Representative Clemens.
But they still, I just want to make sure that the sponsor is clear, they still have concurrent jurisdiction in many of these cases, whereby if we set up an independent redistricting commission, we could resolve all this on the front end before it ever reached the judicial system, where now we're just creating a new system entirely with the hopes that claims go to the state level as opposed to the federal level, which they will. So again, I emphasize my leader's point. Why is this the better option than a independent redistricting commission?
Chairman Kershaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would say that any member of this body would be free to bring a bill on that topic. This was my way to fix or to address the Supreme Court's decision. I think it's also important to note that in the opinion, the Supreme Court pointed to work at the state level to address questions of partisan gerrymandering. However, Tennessee was not among those mentioned because we had no such solution set up.
Representative Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I would just point out that we have repeatedly introduced legislation to create independent redistricting commissions. It has never made it out of a committee, unfortunately. But I do take the leader on the other side of the aisle's word that we want to work together, do this in a fair way. I look forward to having a seat at the table. I know everybody in my caucus certainly does. And to ensure that this is fair, that it never even reaches the courts. But if it does, one last question. You've got in here that the Supreme Court will appoint this 3-judge panel. This Chief Justice, I believe. Is that right?
Chairman Kershaw.
No, sir, that's not correct.
Representative Clemens.
Who's going to appoint the 3-judge panel?
Chairman Kershaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So the way this will work is that wherever the claim is filed, the presiding judge is notified, and they notify the Supreme Court. The presiding judge from that jurisdiction becomes one member of the 3-judge panel. Then the Supreme Court votes, and by a majority vote of the Supreme Court, they will pick 2 judges, one from each of the unrepresented 3 grand divisions.
Representative Clemens.
Okay, so the Supreme Court is choosing 2 of the 3 judges. Takes a majority to have an opinion if they're split. The Supreme Court also elects the Attorney General. The Attorney General would necessarily be representing the state of Tennessee in these cases. Are you not concerned about a clear conflict of interest in that case?
Chairman Kershaw.
No.
Representative Clemens.
That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Williams, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move previous question.
Previous question has been called. Any objection? I don't see enough hands. We're voting. All those in favor of House Bill 1436 as amended, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 68, 24 nays.
House Bill 1436, having received the constitutional majority, I hereby declare it passed without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 217 by Chairman Curcio relative to bail.
Chairman Curcio, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of House Bill 217 on third and final consideration.
Chairman Curcio moves passage, properly seconded. Mr. Clerk, call up First Amendment.
House Criminal Justice Committee Amendment Number 1.
Vice Chairman Sexton, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. House Criminal Justice Committee Amendment Number 1 deletes Section 1 and 6 of the original bill to remove the provisions allowing for termination of monitoring services for failure to pay. With this explanation, Mr. Speaker, I move adoption of House Criminal Justice Committee Amendment Number 1.
Vice Chairman Sexton moves adoption of Amendment Number 1, properly seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. All those in favor of Amendment Number 1 say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopted. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairman Curcio, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I renew my motion.
Chairman Curcio renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of House Bill 217 as amended, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. As I remember voted, does anybody wish to change vote? Carr's aye. Garrett's aye. Vaughn aye. Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 88, no nays.
House Bill 217, I received constitutional majority. I hereby declare passed without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 1352 by Chairman Vaughn and others relative to obligations under warranties and recalls. Mr. Speaker, the Senate bill is on the desk.
Chairman Vaughn, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 1615.
Chairman Vaughn moves substitute conform to Senate Bill 1615, probably seconded without objection. So ordered. Chairman Vaughn, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of Senate Bill 1615 on third and final consideration.
Chairman Vaughn moves passage of Senate Bill 1615 on third and final consideration, probably seconded. Mr. Clerk, call the First Amendment.
House Transportation Committee Amendment Number 1, Mr. Speaker. It's the same as Senate Amendment Number 1.
Chairman Hall, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move to withdraw.
Without objection. Amendment Number 1, withdrawn. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairman Vaughn, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill is a collaborative effort between automobile manufacturers and automobile dealers to make sure that Tennessee automobile dealers are compensated for warranty work the same way as 48 other states across the country. With that, sir, I renew my motion.
Chairman Vaughn renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senate Bill 1615, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member cast their vote? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 85, no nays.
Senate Bill 1615, having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 1353 by Chairman Vaughn and others relative to nursing graduates.
Chairman Vaughn, you're recognized.
Thank you again, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of House Bill 1353 on third and final consideration.
Chairman Vaughn moves passage, properly seconded. Mr. Clerk, call the First Amendment.
House Health Committee Amendment Number 1.
Chairman Terry, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment makes the bill. I defer to the sponsor for further explanation. Move to adopt.
Chairman Terry moves adoption. Amendment Number 1, properly seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. All those in favor of Amendment Number 1 say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopted. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairman Vaughn, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this is continued effort to build our healthcare workforce development. This will allow nursing graduates who have yet to pass their nursing licensing exam to still work in hospitals under direct supervision, allowing them to serve in an almost apprentice role until they have time to pass their licensing exam. This period lasts for 120 days. And with that, sir, I renew my motion.
Chairman Vaughn renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Doggett, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Sponsor, for carrying this legislation. During this 120-day period, is this a continual 120 days? Or I know in some instances, the NCLEX may be taken multiple times because the candidate or the graduate may not meet that score that they need. So as long as they are continuing, if it takes them 3 times to take that test, do they get 3 cracks at that 120 days, or how does that work?
Chairman Vaughn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No, sir, it's a cumulative 120 days.
Representative Doggett.
Thank you very much.
Any further discussion? Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of House Bill 1353 as amended, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 84, no nays, 1 present, not voting.
House Bill 1353, having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 361 by Representative Russell and others relative to abandoned animals.
Representative Russell, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of House Bill 361 on third and final consideration.
Representative Russell moves passage, properly seconded. Mr. Clerk, call up First Amendment.
House Criminal Justice Committee Amendment number 1.
Chairman Kershaw, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. House Criminal Justice Committee Amendment number 1 stipulates that entry must be pursuant to a valid search warrant, a judicially recognized exception to the warrant requirement, or the property owner's consent. With that explanation, Mr. Speaker, I move adoption of House Criminal Justice Committee Amendment number 1.
Chairman Kershaw moves adoption. Amendment number 1, properly seconded. Any discussion on the amendment or on the bill? Representative Shaw, on the amendment? Okay. Representative Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sponsor. Does this amendment, in case of animal cruelty, because I know we kind of had a case back home where there was some animal cruelty involved, and it was kind of a big mess, and I wonder how this amendment would affect that in particular. Can you speak to that, sir?
Representative Russell.
This will allow an animal control officer to enter a abandoned piece of property where the renter moved out and left the animal behind that is left without water and food. So they generally just stay in there and die.
Representative Shaw.
I don't think your mic is on. I'm not hearing you very good.
Representative Russell.
This will allow a animal control officer to enter a abandoned piece of property where they abandon the animal and get the animal instead of it sitting there and dying. But the animal control officer has to have a valid search warrant or a judicially recognized exception to the warrant requirement or the property owner's consent.
Representative Shaw.
Thank you for your explanation. Thank you.
We're on the amendment. Any further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. All those in favor of amendment number 1 say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopted. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
No further amendments, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Russell, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The amendment makes the bill, so I renew my motion.
Representative Russell renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the sponsor yield?
Representative Russell.
I do.
So what is the current process as it stands if there's an abandoned animal and we have somebody that's trying to rescue the animal?
Representative Russell.
We've got 2 sets of animal control officers. Some are certified law enforcement officers that can do this already. However, some are not. And this clarifies that the ones that are not can go to a judge and get the search warrant or the exception to the Fourth Amendment search and seizures or the property owner's consent. So this more addresses the ones that are not post-certified law enforcement officers.
Representative Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So in your opinion, with this change, if there is an abandoned property, this will make it easier in the state of Tennessee for the different entities that would go in to go in and make sure they can save or rescue that animal that would be in distress. Is that correct?
Representative Russell.
That is correct, and this follows other states that passed similar laws.
Representative Powell.
And one last question. The owner I see the property owner's consent is given. But I'm just wondering if it is a abandoned dwelling, I'm thinking oftentimes it would be tough to get someone's consent if it's an abandoned property. So they would have to then go back and try to track down that owner. And I don't see any sort of thing if, say, it was a rental property that was abandoned. That was my only question is why, how that would work, given that usually abandoned properties, it's tough to get the consent of the owner because the property in fact is abandoned.
Representative Russell.
That is true. That's why it's only one of the three, so they can go to the other two instead of getting the property owner's consent.
Representative Powell.
Okay, well, thank you for the explanation. I just want to make sure that, this is making it easier for folks to go in and rescue abandoned animals. Clearly, I'm sure you agree that it's terrible that oftentimes people will leave a property and abandon their animals and leave them behind, and then there's no ability for groups or different entities to be able to go in and rescue those animals. So with your explanation that the intent of this is to make it easier to save these animals, certainly I appreciate that. Thank you.
Chairman Crawford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sponsor yield.
Representative Russell.
I do.
My only question on this, first, let me thank you for bringing this piece of legislation. I think it's wonderful, and it will do a lot to save a lot of animals. The only question I have, will this put an undue burden on our locals as far as, do you have a place? Is there nonprofits in place to take these animals once they are rescued?
Representative Russell.
That will be up to each individual entity. This just allows the animal control officers to enter the abandoned property to get them, and what they do with them is up to them, what they normally have in regulations.
Chairman Crawford.
So you're saying that it's up to animal control to decide where they go?
Representative Russell.
As far as the animals, yes, I would imagine they would do what they normally do now. However, this would just allow them to rescue the animal.
Chairman Crawford.
Thank you for this piece of legislation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Any further discussion? Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of House Bill 361 as amended, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 87, no nays.
House Bill 361, having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Call the next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 197 by Chairman Zachary, relative to records request. Mr. Speaker, the Senate bill is on the desk.
Chairman Zachary, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 135.
Chairman Zachary moves to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 135, probably seconded without objection. So ordered. Chairman Zachary, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of Senate Bill 135 on third and final consideration.
Chairman Zachary moves passage of Senate Bill 135 on third and final consideration, probably seconded. Mr. Clerk, call the First Amendment.
House State Government Committee Amendment number 1, Mr. Speaker. It's the same as Senate Amendment number 1.
Chairman Kiesling, you are recognized.
Sorry, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, sir. House Amendment number 1 is the same as the Senate amendment. So therefore, we move to withdraw.
Without objection, amendment number 1 withdrawn. Next amendment, Ms. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairman Zachary, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this bill establishes a process by which a records custodian may petition a court to prohibit a requester whose intent is to disrupt governmental operations after the requester has been provided notification. With that explanation, I renew my motion.
Chairman Zachary renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senate Bill 135, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. As every member casts their vote, does any member wish to change their vote? Campbell, aye. Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 89, no nays.
Senate Bill 135 having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare it passed without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 674 by Representative Freeman and others relative to food halls.
Representative Freeman, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of House Bill 0674 on third and final consideration.
Representative Freeman moves passage, followed by second. Mr. Clerk, call up next amendment or the First Amendment.
Mr. Speaker, on April 8th, 2021, the House adopted State Government Committee Amendment Number 1. No further amendments.
Representative Freeman, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is the bill that I rolled last week. We had some questions. It creates a new license called the Food Hall License for the Assembly Hall at 5th and Broad in downtown Nashville. It's a multi-floor, 110,000 square foot facility. And with consulting with the ABC, we felt this legislation was the best way to handle it. It allows a main license purchase, which can simplify inventory control, storage, delivery of inventory within the food hall. It allows for people to move freely about amongst the different venues and creates a process for the ABC to approve and regulate individual eateries. Last week, the question was asked, what would happen if one person was fined? And that's contemplated within the bill. That individual eatery would be fined. It would not affect the prime license. The food hall license main holder would be required to have a security plan and ensure the safety of all the patrons. And with that, I renew my motion.
Representative Freeman renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of House Bill 674 as amended, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 70, 14 nays, 5 present, unvoted.
House Bill 674 having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare it passed without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Joint Resolution 219 by Chairman Halford and others, a resolution to confirm the appointment of Stan Butt to the Tennessee Fish and Wildlife Commission. Mr. Speaker, the Senate Joint Resolutions on the desk.
Chairman Halford, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute Senate Joint Resolution 246 for House Joint Resolution 219.
Chairman Halford moves to substitute Senate Joint Resolution 246 for House Joint Resolution 219. Properly seconded. Chairman Halford, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to concur in Senate Joint Resolution 246.
Chairman Halford moves to concur in Senate Joint Resolution 246. Properly seconded. Mr. Clerk, any amendments been filed?
Mr. Speaker, no amendments filed.
Chairman Halford, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. SJR 246 is a confirmation of Stan Butt to the Fish and Wildlife Commission. I renew my motion.
Chairman Halford renews his motion. Any discussion? Any objection to the question? All those in favor of Senate Joint Resolution 246, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 78, 5 nays.
Senate Joint Resolution 246, having received the constitutional majority, I hereby declare it concurred in without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Joint Resolution 220 by Chairman Halford, a resolution to confirm the appointment of Chris Devaney to the Tennessee Fish and Wildlife Commission. Mr. Speaker, the Senate Joint Resolutions on the desk.
Chairman Halford, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute Senate Joint Resolution 245 for House Joint Resolution 220.
Chairman Halford moves to substitute Senate Joint Resolution 245 for House Joint Resolution 220. Properly seconded. Chairman Halford, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to concur in Senate Joint Resolution 245.
Chairman Halford moves to concur in Senate Joint Resolution 245. Properly seconded. Mr. Clerk, any amendments been filed?
Mr. Speaker, no amendments filed.
Chairman Halford, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. SJR 245 is confirmation of Mr. Chris Devaney to the Fish and Wildlife Commission. I renew my motion.
Chairman Halford renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Chairman Dixie, you're recognized. Sorry about that.
That's okay. I don't think she was paying attention anyway, so she didn't mind you calling me leader. Just got a couple quick questions. Mr. Devaney, he's probably been in Tennessee since about 1994 for a while, and he just received his license to hunt and fish in 2017. I'm vaguely familiar with him, but I know that we have a lot of hunters and fishers and wildlife people that enjoy that type of recreation in this state. So I'm just curious about what are some of his qualifications that makes him suitable to be on this commission.
Chairman Halford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Devaney may have only held a license in Tennessee since 2017. However, I believe he originates from Texas. I'm not sure if he has one there. I would assume that he has. He is a longtime hunter and fisherman, sir.
Chairman Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was just saying that I would assume that if he is going to be on this commission, that he had some sort of resume or something that he had to complete in order to show that he was appropriate for this appointment.
Chairman Halford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, I just say that my knowing of Mr. Devaney, and I've known him for several years, is that he is an active hunter and fisherman. And so I don't know what other qualifications you need for that, but if you are
Chairman Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Chair Lady Hazelwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd just like to speak on behalf of Mr. Devaney, who is my constituent, by the way. He is, I have spoken with him. He is an avid outdoorsman. He is also a very astute businessman. He's a committed member of the community. He's worked for, not only in political roles, but he's spent a couple of years heading up a program called the Children's Nutrition Program of Haiti, making sure that those children who suffer from malnourishment have an opportunity through education of the mothers and the families to eat better and be healthier and avoid a lot of diseases that they were dealing with. So I do think he's qualified. More than that, I think he's an exemplary Tennessean, and we should be proud that he has adopted this state and we've adopted him. Thank you.
Thank you. Chairman Crawford, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move previous question.
Previous question has been called. Any objection? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senate Joint Resolution 245, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Sapiki, aye. Leatherwood, aye. Manis, aye. Rudd, aye. Lynn, aye. Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Aye 73, 10 nays, 3 present, not voting.
Senate Joint Resolution 245, having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare concurred with the objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 943 by Representative Manis and others relative to employee rights, Mr. Speaker, is previously considered and reset for today's regular calendar.
Representative Manis, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of House Bill 943 on third and final consideration.
Representative Manis moves passage, properly second. Mr. Clerk, any amendments been filed?
Mr. Speaker, no amendments filed.
Representative Manis, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, House Bill 943 was brought to me by the Tennessee Chamber and the NFIB. House Bill 943 simply clarifies to the employee that if a discrimination or harassment suit is brought against their employer, it must be filed under the Tennessee Human Rights Act, THRA, and not the Tennessee Public Protection Act. This only provides clarity for the cause of action and also reduces the risk of the employee's claim being dismissed for procedural misunderstanding and costing the employer and possibly the employee unnecessary attorney's fees. These acts date back to July 2014, and from what I understand, the process that I just gave was the original intent of the General Assembly at that point. Mr. Speaker, I renew my motion.
Representative Manis renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Clemens, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And sponsor, I'm looking at the bill and I'm trying to figure out why we're excluding activities prohibited under federal law, discrimination and employment from the code in this instance. Can you explain that, please?
Representative Manis.
Thank you. From what I understand, It is just a clarification. The THRA is really for discrimination acts. The TPPA originally is, if you, a term that's very familiar, is more of a whistleblower claim. And in 2019, the case law was, I think, Weinert versus Sevierville, where the Weinerts had filed a claim under TPPA, and it was dismissed because it was filed under the wrong act, and it should have been filed under THRA. And there are several other cases that would represent that, but that's my understanding.
Representative Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is it your understanding or position that an employee has to choose either or can they bring a charge under both?
Representative Manis.
I think if the action applies to both, they can bring the charge under both. An example would be if you've been discriminated against or if you are filing a sexual harassment claim for some reason, but then there was also, you had reported an OSHA violation at the same time. You certainly are not precluded from filing both of those. Or if both cases apply, you can still file under THRA and TPPP. So it's just to clarify, if you have only one, then you need to file under TPPA or THRA. But if you have two sets of circumstances, you can apply under THRA and TPPP.
Representative Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So that's my concern here. I think the employee has the option to bring a claim under both. And with this law, we're simply narrowing the scope of one to exclude employment discrimination from grounds to bring such a claim under one. So that's the root of my concern. So I appreciate you answering my questions very well. Thank you.
Leader Camper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sponsor Gill.
Yes.
Representative Manis.
Yes.
Are there any current examples that's going on as to why this bill is needed? Is there anything currently going on that you can share with us?
Representative Manis.
I'm sorry. I don't know of any current examples that are going on, just the example of 2019. And there are some other cases that have been since 2014, but I don't know of anything specifically that is going on right this moment.
Leader Camper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I understand that there's some concerns around privacy issues, if there's, in talking about cases and things like that. But my question is, you don't know that there are any current cases that are listed as non-compliance within this bill. There's nothing that you know that's going on, any non-compliance issue. And I don't want to get into the details of any cases, but there's nothing that you currently know that's going on that you can share with us.
Representative Manis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Currently, I do not know of anything that is going on currently.
Leader Camper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Sponsor.
Thank you. Representative Chairman Boyd, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And sponsor, I appreciate you bringing this bill. I think your predecessor carried it last year and actually passed it on the House floor. And members, this is a good piece of legislation. It actually cleans up the statute a little bit with regard to this. Tennessee Human Rights Act is where this belongs. This right now, if someone had a complaint, it could cause a duplicate cause of action against the employer for the exact same issue. And so I appreciate you bringing this, and this is it's a good piece of legislation. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of House Bill 943 vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. As every member voted, does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Aye, 67, 15 nays, 2 present, unvoted.
House Bill 943, having received the constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
That completes the regular calendar, Mr. Speaker.
Next order, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, the House has a message calendar.
Chairman Williams, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The amendment that the Senate put on my bill sets a sunset date. This was the bill that this body passed out that protected the privacy rights for schools across the state. With that, Mr. Speaker, I move to non-concur to Senate Amendment number 1.
We have our first non-concur. Without objection, we non-concur. Next message, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, that completes the message calendar.
Next order, Mr. Clerk.
Unfinished business.
Unfinished business. Leader Lamberth, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In consultation with the minority leader, I would move at this time that House Bill 580 be heard in the Government Operation Committee next week.
You've heard the motion. Any objection? Without objection, so ordered. Leader Lamberth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that House Bill 733 be heard in the Criminal Justice Subcommittee next week.
You've heard the motion. Any objections? Without objection, so ordered. Unfinished business, or are y'all under announcements? Chairman Crawford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, the final calendar for local government committee will be heard on April 27th, 2021. The deadline for bills to be put on notice to be heard this year will be Wednesday, April 21st at 3:30. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, we have a message from the Senate. Mr. Speaker, I'm directed to return to the House. House Bill 566, substituted for Senate bill on same subject, amended and passed by the Senate.
Monday's message calendar. Any further unfinished business? Next order, Mr. Clerk.
Announcements.
Announcements. Representative Jurgen, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The final calendar for civil justice full is next Wednesday. We'll be moving from House Room 3 to House Room 1 at the same time.
Thank you. Chairman Terry, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The House Health Committee will begin hearing our last calendar on Tuesday next week, April 20th at 10:30 a.m. in House Hearing Room 1. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Lamar, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Shelby delegation, we're going to have an emergency meeting tomorrow at the request of many of our delegation members. And also our delegation night out is going to be Tuesday the 20th. Check your emails by the end of the day.
Thank you. Chairman Doggett, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The House Criminal Justice Subcommittee has changed times once again in our efforts to close this committee before August. And so
we won't be here, but you might be.
Okay, well, thank you. We are planning on meeting Tuesday, 10:30, House Hearing Room 3 for the Criminal Justice Subcommittee. Tuesday, 10:30, House Hearing Room 3. If you're going to have guests to come and speak and testify in that, make sure you observe the 24-hour rule. Thank you very much.
Representative Love, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, I have with me, of course, Senator Gilmore. We just want to make this wonderful announcement that many of you, I'm sure, know about now, that we're so proud that Tennessee State University has a new head coach, Eddie George, former of the Titans. So we're gonna see if we can get him down here sometime before we leave. So thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Chairman Carr, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Subcommittee on Property and Planning of the local committee has closed, subject to the call of the chair.
Any further announcements? All right, members, before you go, we do see the light at the end of the tunnel. Just to let you know, we're moving very efficiently and effectively. Thank you all for your service over the last several weeks. But we do have an end in sight very soon. So thank you for all your hard work. Mr. Clerk, next order.
Roll call.
Roll call. Mr. Clerk, please take the roll.
Mr. Speaker, 88 members present.
Next order, Mr. Clerk.
That completes the regular order, Mr. Speaker.
Leader Gant, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that the House stand in recess until 5 p.m. on Monday, April 19, 2021.
Without objection, the House stands in recess till 5 p.m. on Monday, April 19th, 2021.